Okay, we're recording. All right. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so we are now approaching the last few sections on Venerable Mahākaccāna. Last week we read the Thera verses around Mahākaccāna. And again, he has a very kind of not so much poetic in nature, but more analytical in nature, let's put it that way. And that's just the characteristic of his approach in the practice, in the teaching others as well. So here, this section is titled the Exegetical Treatises. I was just looking up dictionary.com. What is exegetical? And it is used as an adjective, as it's explained as of or relating to exegesis. Okay, which doesn't tell much. Or it's explanatory, or it is interpretative. So what is exegesis then? So exegesis is a critical explanation or interpretation of a text or a portion of a text, especially used to explain Bible, the text here referring to the Bible. So here they are using the word exegetical or exegesis as a common way to explain when somebody wants to do a very critical or very analytical interpretation of a form of, let's say, religious text like the Bible, let's say. Okay, so they use a similar term. So Venerable Mahākaccāna is of that nature. He takes the teachings of the Buddha and then gives a more critical interpretation or a more analytical interpretation of those teachings as well. He is of the nature of doing. And we have read in the previous sections as well from the Majjhima Nikaya, for example, Madhu Pindika Sutta is a good example, and a couple of others as well. So let's read through this one. Before concluding this survey of the Venerable Mahākaccāna's contribution to the Buddha's dispensation, we should briefly take note that the Theravada tradition ascribes to him two exegetical treatises called the Petakopadesa and the Netipakarana, and an influential grammar of the Pali language called the Kaccayana Vyakarana. Okay. Now, the two treatises are not included in the Pali canon, except in Burma, where they were lately incorporated into the Sutta Pitaka, but they have exerted a major influence on the evolution of Theravadan exegetical method. Bhikkhu Nyanaponika, who translated both works into English, holds that the Netipakarana is a later, more refined version of the Petakopadesa. Both deal with essentially the same method of exegesis, which in the Nyanaponika is clearer and more streamlined. The method is designed to elicit from the Buddha's discourses the unifying principles that underlie the variegated expressions of the Dhamma. It is founded on the assumption that beneath the many diverse utterances of the Master, spoken in accordance with the temperament and situation of the auditors, there runs a single consistent system, which with the right exegetical techniques can be extracted from the particular statement under investigation and displayed in its unadorned essence. The Nyanaponika is intended to define that system. Okay, so this is an extra treatise. It's not part of the Sutta Pitaka, not part of the Pali Canon. Okay, now the Neti, I guess Neti here is short for the Nyanaponika, as Venerable Nyanamoli has explained, is not itself a commentary, but a guide for commentators. It explicates not so much the teachings themselves, except by way of exemplification. So for those of us who aren't too familiar with the word exemplification, which comes, so let's try and go to exemplification. Something that illustrates. So it's an example or an illustration. So it's not so much the teaching themselves, except by way of giving examples as the tools that are to be used to elicit the structural elements that underlie and shape the expression of the teachings. Its methodology is set up under two main headings: the phrasing and the meaning. The phrasing is handled by 16 modes of conveyance, techniques of verbal and logical analysis that can be applied to any specified passage in order to extract the principles that lie behind the verbal formulation and logical organization of its content. The meaning is handled by three methods or guidelines. These take the meaning to be the aim or goal of the doctrine, which is the attainment of Nibbana, and then disclose how the teaching is in question signifies the attainment of that goal. Two additional methods are then proposed for correlating the sutta's terminology with the methods for explicating the meaning. The method is applied by the sub-commentaries to the first sutta of each of the four Nikayas in special supplements to the main portion of the sub-commentary. A commentary on the Neti attributed to Acharya Dhammapala also exists. The colophons of both exegetical treatises. So what is a colophon? So again, let's check dictionary.com. So colophon, sorry, I pronounced it wrong. So it's colophon. Colophon is a publisher or a printer's distinctive emblem. It's an emblem, publisher's emblem, used as an identifying device on its books or other works. So that's one explanation of what the colophon is. The other is an inscription at the end of a book or a manuscript, used especially in the 15th and 16th centuries, giving the title or subject of the work, its author, the name of the printer or publisher, and the date and place of publication. So it's just an inscription. So let's think of it that way. The inscription at the end of that, those treatises, attribute them to the Buddha's disciple Mahākaccāna. So they're saying that both these treatises, there is an inscription at the end that attributes them both to Venerable Mahākaccāna. The Neti colophon states further that it was approved by the Blessed One and recited at the original Buddhist council. Western scholars have been inclined to dismiss the ascription of authorship to Mahākaccāna as fanciful. Venerable Nyanamoli, however, in the introduction to his translation of the Neti, offers an explanation that preserves at least a grain of credibility in the traditional Buddhist view without falling into the opposite extreme of credulity. So let's check what credulity is. I'm guessing it comes from the noun. So credulity is a noun. It's willingness to believe or trust too readily. So here what it's trying to say is Venerable Nyanamoli offers an explanation that preserves a little bit of the credibility without falling into the opposite extreme. The opposite extreme is to simply believe too readily without adequate evidence. Another explanation for credulity is gullibility. So here it's saying Venerable Nyanamoli offers some, in his translation, it explains that this text has some credibility to it, but without going into the extreme of simply believing it. So Venerable Nyanamoli proposes that we distinguish between the authorship of the exegetical method on the one hand and the authorship of the treatises on the other. So he suggests as a hypothesis, possibly though neither provable nor refutable, that means maybe we cannot prove it, but we also maybe cannot deny it, that the elder Mahākaccāna and his lineage of pupils in Avanti may have formulated or a compendious method for interpreting the Buddha's discourses, and that this method, or at least its elements, may have been discussed at the early councils and transmitted orally in skeletal form. Okay, so this is a hypothesis that Venerable Nyanamoli suggests. What is compendious? Compendious means containing the substance of a subject. So in brief, so it offers just the substance of it, but in a concise manner. So it was suggesting that perhaps this is a separate two texts that act as like a compendium, more concise method for interpreting the Buddha's teachings. It's a suggestion. A hypothesis is like a suggestion, okay, I'll just put hypothesis. Usually hypothesis in science, we use it, oops, what did I press? Sorry. I pressed something. My bad. Hypothesis in science is used like when we are doing research. We use it as an initial statement. So when we start a research, we have to start with a hypothesis. It means we are proposing that proposing a statement. And then the rest of the research will be to prove or refute that hypothesis that we put forth in the beginning of the research. So that's what hypothesis is about. So here, hypothesis is a proposition assumed as a premise in an argument. So he proposes it, that possibly Venerable Mahākaccāna and his students came up with this compendium of interpreting the Buddha's discourses in an analytical way. And that because at that time nothing was written, so everything is orally passed down. That's why we call it oral transmission. And the means it is memorized and recited and recited and recited. So what he is suggesting as a hypothesis, there was this compendium, and it actually may have existed in the early councils. Okay. At a later date, the method could have given birth to a treatise intended to coordinate its elements and to illustrate their application to specific texts. And this treatise eventually became the Pettakopadesa. And sometime later, perhaps even centuries later, a more polished and perspicuous version of the same work was made, this being the Nyanaponika. So what does perspicuous mean? Perspicuous means it is clearly expressed or presented. So it's suggesting that maybe a few centuries later, this initial treatise was more polished, more clearly expressed or clearly presented, and this being the Nyanaponika. As the original methodology embedded in these treatises was derived from the Venerable Mahākaccāna, or at any rate was believed to have been derived from him, out of reverence for its architect, and also perhaps to boost the prestige of the treatises, their compilers billed him as the author. G.P. Malalasekara offers a parallel hypothesis to explain the imputed authorship of the Pali grammar, the Kaccayana Vyakarana, to the Buddha's great disciple, to Mahākaccāna. So this other one that was mentioned earlier. Where was it? Here, this one. Okay. So these are hypotheses and suggestions that possibly Mahākaccāna was the one that came up with these additional documents or additional texts, let's put it that way. Okay. And while such propositions must remain conjectural, so again, what is conjectural? Conjectural means conjectural. Excuse my pronunciation. So it's conjectural. Conjectural means of the nature of, or could be problematical. So here it's trying to suggest that these propositions not necessarily problematical, but more speculative, let's put it that way. So here the dictionary gives examples. See, as an example, theories about the extinction of dinosaurs are highly conjectural. So there's a lot of speculation about how the dinosaurs were extinct. So here, these propositions suggested by Venerable Nyanamoli and G.P. Malalasekara could be speculative, yeah, and they both these authors acknowledge that is speculative. The type of detailed analysis of textual statements found in the Neti Pakarana is consonant with the approach that the historical Mahākaccāna brought to bear on the interpretation of the Buddha's brief utterances. Thus, it would seem that even if no direct connection actually exists between the Great Elder and these Pali treatises ascribed to him, the fact remains that they embody the spirit that he represented. That means the style and the way these treatises are written. The spirit, so evident in the suttas that record his elucidations of the Buddha's word, couples equity of insight with terseness of expression. What does it mean? Equity. So let's. So sorry, again, wrong pronunciation is equity. Okay, equity. Equity means sharpness. Comes from also close to the word acute. So that means equity of vision, that means sharpness of vision, or equity of insight means sharpness of insight. Couples Venerable Mahākaccāna's sharpness of his insight with terseness of expression. And what does terse mean? In this context, well, terseness has many synonyms, some of which is crisp, concise, curt. Here there's even the word impermanence, transience, succinct. So I guess, again, from all the previous readings we had in this chapter on Mahākaccāna, he's not a very, his choice of words isn't very flowery, isn't very poetic, isn't very expressive. He's more concise, he's more technical, but then again, still very sharp with his insight, precise, precision of formulation with profundity of meaning. Profundity comes from the word profound, I take it, think. Now, how did this change into thesaurus? My dictionary changed into a thesaurus by itself. Give me 1 second. So profundity, yes, it's the quality or state of being profound. That means very deep in meaning. So he has his style is more sharp with insight, accurate, concise, precise of formulation, but deep of meaning. In summary, it was on the basis of such skills that the Enlightened One named him the foremost master of doctrinal exposition. And it is this that constitutes his outstanding contribution to the Buddha's dispensation. Okay, so that actually wraps up pretty much the senior disciples of the Buddha during his time, as described. And this is really, this body of work by Venerable Nyanaponika Thera and Hellmuth really is a culmination of their research work, let's put it that way. They researched into the Sutta Pitaka, obviously, all the different Nikayas, and from there came up with this compilation, compilation of the significant works of each of the senior disciples, their style, what they were, what their strengths were, let's put it that way, what they were well known for, and their contribution to the dispensation of Buddha Gautama. Okay, and on many occasions we read that they are the culmination of their own practice in their final lifetime, let's say, came to fruition not just simply from this lifetime itself, but from some possibly some aspiration made many aeons ago, during the time of a previous Buddha in the past. Okay. Also, we read how quite a number of them have been related in some way to Buddha Gautama in a previous life, whether it could be as a friend, a sibling, a family member, or some other form of, let's say, companionship maybe, or at least in some way they were known to each other, quite close. Does tell us a lot about how let's put it this way. In many things that we do in our daily lives, we come into contact with many different people, whether it's family members, whether it's people at work, whether it is friends, acquaintances, people we've never really met before, and due to some causes and conditions come into contact with them, and at that point in time suddenly have a form of, gee, I feel like I've known you for a very long time, as in we would click with them so easily. All these come to be not by chance, not by, coincidence, mere coincidence, as some people would say. A lot of times it quite likely is due to certain past collaborations, certain previous inclinations, and that in itself is a good lesson for us. It's a good lesson for us to reflect, to think about the type of, for lack of a better word, energy exchange. Okay, why I say for lack of a better word, because there's probably a better way to explain it. But every single relationship that we have, whether personal or professional in our life, is, if we want to think of it from that perspective, essentially an energy exchange. And that energy can come in many different forms, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes always positive, sometimes always negative, sometimes a mixture of both. And many times it can start one way and it can end the other way. What this also shows us is, because we have been in the realms of samsara for countless lifetimes, we don't know who we are in contact in this lifetime, whether we have known them before in some previous life. We don't know. That it quite possibly could be the case, and that's the reason why we come into contact with each other again. And with that kind of an understanding, by using our practice, first of all, by using our understanding of the three characteristics, the nature of all things, that is, the anicca, dukkha, anatta, the impermanence of all things, the unsatisfactory, the impersonal nature of all things, helps us. That's one of the reasons why we study and practice this teachings of the Buddha, to help us essentially lead a harmonious life with whoever we come into contact with proper understanding. That's what the teachings of the Buddha are meant to do. They are meant to help us live our lives, our practice with understanding. So one of the understanding is we all come into contact with each other due to certain causes and conditions that arise, that allow that to happen. When those causes and conditions cease to be there anymore, then naturally such relationship will cease to be as well. Having said that, we shouldn't have to be too paranoid, okay? Because then there's the other extreme going, oh dear, then I don't want to leave the house because I don't want to create unnecessary causes and conditions that may affect my life. Now, that is a little bit carrying it too far, let's put it that way. And the Buddha's teaching has always been about the middle path, the middle way. And that's why the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path, why it's called the Noble Eightfold Path, is because it is actually a recipe, kind of, yeah, you can think of it that way. The Noble Eightfold Path is essentially a recipe to guide us how we can lead a fulfilling life, a harmonious life that ideally not only supports our livelihood, also supports our own practice. Plus, it also ideally creates the kind of harmonious relationships that we can carry forth with those around us as well. And the four Brahma Viharas, the loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity are tools that we can use to bring us along that path. So we can think of it as, and perhaps this could be a wrong interpretation, so don't take my word for it, but we can think of it as we are the cook or the chef of our journeys. The Buddha left us a recipe. Okay, sorry, I need to change posture again. The Buddha left us a recipe that will, if we follow that recipe, we will be able to cook up cook up a beautiful dish that we can use to carry us forward, whether this life or whether future lives, until we attain nibbana, or the final fruition. And in order to cook up that recipe, we need some tools. Just like in the kitchen, we have pots and pans and wok and different forms of knives and ladles and stuff. And what are the tools? Well, the tools are the Brahma Viharas, the framework would be, the Dana, Sila, Bhavana, the Sila, Samadhi, Panya. All these things are like part of this big, thick cookbook of multiple recipes inside. Okay? Or you can think of it as a manual, right? Like Bhante Vimalaramsi used to say, think of the Majjhima Nikaya as your manual of instructions on how to practice. So we can think of it this way as well. The Nikayas are like this big, gigantic, huge cookbook that contains all the different recipes. If we follow the recipes, and also when we are following the recipes, we test it, just like, if anyone who's listening to this watches some cooking shows, if you notice the chef, as they are cooking, they will test what they are cooking. If it's not tasting right, they will adjust. In the same way, when we are following the recipes, the cookbooks of the teachings of the Buddha, we need to test as we go along, just to make sure that we continue to be on the right path. Okay, so we have covered Sariputta, Mahamoggallana, Mahākaccāpa, Ananda, Anuruddha, and Mahākaccāna. And next reading, we will continue with the great women disciples of the Buddha. And finally, a number of very interesting characters, Angulimala, Anathapindika, and a few others. Okay, any thoughts that you'd like to share, Pai or Paul, before we wrap up? Not really. Then we can just end the session with sharing merits. Okay. I will just share the text and let us share merits together. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, thank you so much again for listening. I hope it has been useful, and then we can continue next time with the great women disciples of the Buddha. Okay, those who are interested can dial in next time. All right, take care, have a good week. Bye-bye.